sports, alcohol, or education. Living in this life, choose the things that's important. Dedicate this to kids with the ambition, and even the adults who end up in prison for taking drugs. It's not a good thing, cause they can.
Another edition of Nipping It in the Bud, produced by a fortnightly program produced by Social Life Issues. We say a special good evening to our viewers. In our last edition, we spoke about suicide, and this evening we'd like to talk about depression, its symptoms, and some possible solutions. I am Will Campbell, and this evening I am your moderator. We have with us in the studio this evening some very special persons. We have Dr. Faith Harding. She is perhaps no stranger to Guyanese, and certainly no stranger to this program, having been a contributor to the program on quite a few occasions. Welcome, Dr. Harding.
Thank you.
We also have with us Mr. Vidyaratha Kissoon. Mr. Vidyaratha Kissoon is very knowledgeable on the issue we want to discuss this evening, and we want to thank you for coming on the show with us this evening.
All right, thank you, Will. And good evening to all your viewers.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. The issue of depression. Now, very often you hear people saying, I feel depressed, I am depressed. I want to ask this question to you, Dr. Harding. Is depression just a mood? Is it simply, you feel depressed today and it's okay, tomorrow you get over it and you move on? Or is it something deeper than that? Is it more serious?
It could be more serious. Sometimes we have depressive moments or times when we feel sad, a sense of melancholy, as they would call it. And then there's the clinical depression, which is really a disorder. And it destabilizes us, it makes us feel tired, not wanting to do anything, not wanting to see anyone, irritable. And this goes through the spectrum from childhood to adulthood. Depression is a disorder a mental disorder, so to speak.
A mental disorder.
Yes.
Now, there seems to be, when we hear mental disorder, there's a stigma attached to that. Is it something that we should hide from people? Should we run from it?
Not at all. It's because we hide from it that the problem persists and gets passed on to other persons around us, who, especially children, learn how to behave when they're feeling sad. It has a lot to do with the thoughts that we have. Actually, it's a thinking disorder where you can experience a situation, and rather than think of it in a positive way, we think of it as something terrible, something bad, and we must be sad, we must get what they call depressed.
Okay.
But as I said, it can be something that would last for a day and then return again, or it can be a disorder, a mental disorder.
All right, so we want to talk this evening about clinical depression then, the disorder.
Okay.
You said that it is a thought disorder. Is it something that is biological? Does it have any biological origins? Is it something that happens in our bodies that causes us to?
Yes, it does have biological beginnings, or it can be a way of behaving for some people. It's like Winston Churchill was clinically depressed, and so was a U.S. president.
Lincoln
suffered for years
from
what they call melancholy, but it was
melancholy in those times.
Yeah, and we now call it clinical depression.
Right.
And people go into these moods, so to speak, because of something happening in their lives. And some of the best of us live very depressed lives, or we're living with the disorder, the disease, some people want to call it, but in our field we call it a disorder.
Okay. I don't hear too many people in Guyana talking about clinical depression. I hear people saying they're depressed. They feel sad, they're in a bad mood, whatever. They feel low. But I don't hear too many people talking about clinical depression.
And it can be genetic, it can be biological, it can be environmental, as well as psychological.
Okay.
So there are those different aspects of depression. biological, genetic, psychological. So.
All right, Vidya, I'd like, you have written a lot about depression, and I suppose that you have quite a bit of knowledge, more than the average lay person.
I think I think before people want to know what it is, it's not like writing if I'm a researcher or so, but it's just really about my own experiences of managing my own. And I haven't certainly been professionally diagnosed, and I want to say that, but it's just that in terms of acknowledging that I've had to manage depression. I deal with depression. It took me a couple of years. Being a man, it takes a long time to own up to some of these things, and you know, when I finally had to, I remember the first time I wrote on my blog about thinking about the insane. I just wanted to emphasize a point that Dr. Harding made, is that, you know, depression is not melancholy or the moment of sadness. You know, it's not a day. Life is full of different emotions. There's joy, happiness, sadness, anger, grief. But depression is one of those things which, it's like a cloud. It's been described in different ways. One of the things I think is, it's like this cloud that is always there, and sometimes it moves, but it's always there, and you're always conscious of it. And when I realized is that this is next to start reading and understanding about it, and about the feelings about it, and also when listening to friends talk through what was happening to them. It was interesting, as Dr. Harding said, is that I share, I think different people have had different experiences wondering what's happening with their friends. Is that the biological issues, we were talking just before about postpartum depression, for women who've had children, some women after, you know, women who might never have had any symptoms of depression in their lives, or never had any experience because of the hormonal changes, and so some women would have that.
Postpartum depression.
Postpartum after birth.
After birth,
right.
Okay.
Then I know another friend who at one time was on a tablet for an ulcer, steroids, I think, to deal with an ulcer. But the side effects of that steroid was depression.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember one time talking to him on the phone, and I said to him, you know, and then he said to me, no, because he refused to take the medication that the doctor gave him for depression because it was making him feel sleepy and feeling different, and he preferred to be miserable and make all of his friends, you know. But it's a good thing that we talked about it, because I think if we spoke to other friends who didn't realize that this was happening, is that, you know, you would set and train a different kind of effect. So there are different people, you know, as I said, in my own situation, after knowing things, you start to learn to manage and have the cloud. And writing is certain, I blog about it, is one way to deal with it, you know, journaling in a way.
You've tried to bring awareness to the issue of depression. What in your assessment are the general attitudes about people in Guyana that you deal with regarding the issue of depression?
So, well, first of all, on the one hand, it's thinking that depression means this moments of sadness. So I think it's this understanding too that I feeling depressed now because of my boyfriend left me is a different thing from understanding. Yes, I mean, and there are much. I think we were going to talk about some of the signs that Dr. Harry knows. It's a much more long term. It affects you in a longer phase. It's about changing activities and so on. The interesting thing about depression we talk about is that it's easy to mask. Depression.
So you pretend that you're okay.
and you can function and perform sometimes while going through the most awful times. And I know that for myself. That, you know, that feeling very low but still delivering whatever I had to do to deliver.
But could it be so bad that you cannot function?
Yes, some people have had, definitely as you read around different people's experiences. I was talking about my friend who had postpartum, she had to be committed and have electric shock therapy.
Right. That's an interesting one, that electronic therapy.
That's like the last resort.
People do it. Yeah, but it's done on a more regular basis these days. A lot of people go into clinics to get that electric shock, we used to call it long ago, to the brain to remove the memory. The technology, what it does is remove the memory that causes you to become depressed. Remember, it is thought. A lot of this has to do with your thoughts. A lot of this has to do with whether you have enough serotonin,
Right.
the
So there's
love,
another thing I'm talking about, a happy
hormone
right.
in your brain. You know, if you don't have enough of that, that leads to a lot of sadness and depression.
The nutrition issues.
Yes.
Now, there's another talk about foods, the kinds of foods you did that help. Good nutrition helps to alleviate, some of the foods. If you're on the nurse and certain things, for some people, it's also something to think about, is what kinds of foods you're eating, and making sure that you have all the right balance of nutrients in your diet.
I'm hoping that you have some diet plans available for us later.
Sorry, no, I have not chocolate. I know that. That's unfortunately some of us sometimes we binge on the wrong things.
Like
Okay.
chocolates,
Yeah, like
my love,
chocolates.
love.
So chocolate does
and
not help.
Coca-Cola.
There's a thing apparently they say that chocolate. There are several things because of course the serotonin is used. So the sweet generates the serotonin and so on. But then of course
okay.
if you're indulging in these bad habits is not good either.
Right. Causes other problems.
It causes other problems, but certainly, definitely things like the cocoa, and dark chocolate, which, and then there are people who talk about other things. But just generating foods, I know.
I've heard that bananas.
The
help.
potassium, right?
They
The
give
thing about
Bananas help your
potassium.
brain too.
Yeah.
Now, if depression is an issue of a shortage of that happy hormone in your brain, then can somebody who's depressed always just pull themselves up? I mean, snap out of it, go out
It
and have
depends.
a good
If it's
time.
clinical, it's hardly likely that they have learned how to. The electric shock is one, where ECT, where you go in and you get the memory of the pain that is causing the depression to be removed. And sometimes it lasts for 6 months. And then you go for another treatment.
Okay.
And sometimes it's over years that you would be treated, where the memory of the pain is taken away. And then you feel full of life, full of energy, and so on.
Until you
So
get
that's what the
depressed.
therapy, the therapy that they use, this electric shock in the brain.
I think
It's mostly psychiatrists who would recommend that.
So you would need some help getting.
You
getting-
do
But
need
that's
some
a
help.
very, I
It's-
think, as it says, a last
that's
resort.
extreme.
That's an extreme case where
But then you
people
have
are-
the drugs.
And
Then in
medications,
pharmacology, you're a psychiatrist. And now in the U.S., they're training people in psychotherapy, counselors, and so on in pharmacology, where pretty soon they'll be able to recommend or write a prescription.
Oh, okay.
Now, there can be antidepressants or antipsychotic drugs. They're numerous, and for the level at children's levels and so on, they use some of them that can be very harmful. As a therapist, I prefer to use cognitive behavior therapy. So that is known to be one very sure way of helping depressed people.
Cognitive behavior.
Cognitive behavior therapy.
Therapy. You would prefer cognitive behavior.
I prefer.
therapy
It's the only one
rather
I could
than-
use.
Right, rather than
know?
the drugs.
Right.
Would you say that some people need to use the drugs?
It is claimed the psychiatrists and people who are do a lot of research on depression. They don't have all the answers, but right now they do say you should use an antidepressant as well as the cognitive behavior therapy.
Okay.
Cognitive behavior therapy would take a little longer. The injection goes straight to your bloodstream, or a tablet goes to your body, and it would work fast.
Okay.
Cognitive behavior therapy is changing the way you think. And that takes some work, because sometimes you'd have to take a client or a patient way back to their childhood, where the depression might have been derived at some stage based on the child's experiences, the home, the environment, those things that impact, that make us depressed. And so cognitive behavior therapy or play therapy that I use a lot, art therapy with both children and adults, can help as well in depression. It's known to be for sure.
You said that children can also suffer from depression. What do children
yes.
have to be depressed about?
Oh, lots of children are born sad, unwanted by their parents. A lot of children are not only born sad, but they grow up being sad. Look, our emotions are developed very early in our lives as babies. I may have mentioned on the last program, at 10 weeks, a child begins to hear. 10 weeks of gestation, a child begins to hear what the mother is saying
womb.
and feeling in the womb. And as that child is growing and in the mother's womb and the mother's behaving and so on, many children are born and their mothers hate them. Their mothers don't know why. But they don't get the happy hormone. You know, oxytocin is not coming into the brain. It's blocked off, or it doesn't exist for the mother, so there's no happiness for the mammary glands to really produce that milk for the child, and the mother is not able to nurse the child, to comfort the child. And a lot of people wouldn't admit to not liking their children. It's a big, hard job for them to like their children when they're born sometimes.
Okay.
So that can lead to feelings of sadness, being unwanted. Definitely where it occurs a lot is for boys by 10 years of age. They can become depressed. They perform worse in their lives in school at 11. By between 11 and 13 adolescents, it's when we are beginning to know who we are or look for an identity. It's when our self-esteem could be its lowest. It's when hormones are bouncing around in our bodies and making us feel very unsure and insecure. We're beginning to wonder, are we a boy or are we a girl? You know? And what is really happening with us? Or suppose we're born with both organs. Which one would we choose to be with? The male or the female organs? You know? So these are things that a lot of people don't even know exist in people's lives. But children do get depressed, and as adolescents, depression is very high, and in our country, a lot of our children are drinking alcohol, smoking marijuana, and experimenting with a lot of different drugs. That comes very close to having a depressive disorder.
I'm going to come back to the alcohol and use of other drugs and depression. What are some of the things that can trigger depression? What are some of the things that could cause somebody to experience an episode of depression? Maybe you could help.
Right, so I like how you asked the question, but what children got to be depressed about? And I remember that's something that I remember a lot of, that's one of the reactions I had to deal with. When people ask, what's wrong with you? You got no chick nor child, what's wrong with you? Right, what you got to be depressed about? You rich, you are walking. It's about understanding that, I think what Faith said is that this interesting thing about the word trigger, or whatever the memories are, or the reaction, is that there's a whole set of psychological, biological things going on. So that what might trigger something, what might trigger an episode, no, might not be the trigger the next time round. Okay. But the behavioral, the thinking modification, or the way we deal with things as you go through counseling, or what have you learned or you read as you reorganize your head in terms of how you think about things, is that you learn to deal with these things. I remember a friend of my aunt watching a news program with the bomb blasts in Ireland, and that news program triggered an episode
of depression.
Yeah, for her. I mean, so there are different things that, I mean, she stuff, but in terms of where the episodes come and having to, so different points, and it's not. It's a trigger, but then so there are lots of other things happening to people where.
So it's usually not one issue.
It's not one
just
issue,
a combination of things, and then there's
something, some event that sets off
that
sets off an inability to respond, and then it lingers unless you then readjust your head into, to take on the things that you learn in terms of how you cope with that situation in a healthy way, rather than succumb to it. But knowing helps. But one of the questions I tell anybody is don't ask. Is that question? Who you got to be depressed about? That's why, and I
makes
think
it worse.
Yeah, I think a lot of alcohol use in Guyana is around people who are masking their problems.
I was
and
about
drinking,
to ask.
Drinking liquor with and are using other narcotics.
I've heard that alcohol and narcotics trigger depression. I've also heard that some people use it to mask, to try to hide their depression. Which is it really?
I think different
Chicken
people
and egg.
have they have different biochemical reactions, and right is which one comes first, and the alcohol does the pain. Some people drink every day, or you know, and function because they think they're performing well and they're
Well,
functioning,
right.
you know, and they don't.
And
Some
that is
people
their
smoke
way.
marijuana every day and
Yeah,
That's their
function.
way of coping.
Right, of
coping
dealing,
with
right, the
depression, of
narcotics
not
help.
having to deal
Yes,
with
yeah.
the.
But different people have different, you know, depending on the narcotic of choice. It has different reactions on people's bodies depending what they've eaten, you know, their own family.
I'm wondering if I'm hearing you saying that, you know, if it works for you, go right ahead.
Not with certainly, certainly. Well, that's one of the things about learning. I think, in terms of understanding, is that you don't end up in unhealthy behaviors.
Okay.
Because the thing about one of the things that I learned is that I know in my whole. I remember I had this one time where I have to crunch. So it was cheese sticks and crackers, and I just had to be crunching all this crap. And even sometimes I'd be sick in my stomach because I would eat so much of it. But it was just this feeling, and I remember doctor saying to me, "Hold on a minute, you're probably dealing with some things there." And so one on the other hand says, "Yeah, if that works for you, don't do that." I remember talking to a friend about running. I used to run on the seawall, and exercise is wonderful for the serotonin thing, but not. It didn't help all the time. I remember one night I talked to a friend. He runs 5 miles. He lives in New York in the winter. And he said, yeah, that sometimes he could still run the 5 miles, finish it without any pain in his body, and still feel exactly the same way
As he
started. The necessary, but at least he exercised rather than drinking. So physically for the body, the exercise is good. So it's about knowing, managing, understanding.
Your body as well.
Yeah, no, right.
And your limitations.
Limitations, right.
You know, because this persistent sadness and worthlessness or uselessness, hopelessness,
Despair
is what
really.
drives, the despair. And you see people shaking their legs like that. That might be anxiety, but also a depressed person, finds something to keep them floating, And the worst part is the end result of suicide. I'm not saying that everybody that commits suicide was depressed. But certainly, everybody that has depression, as a clinical depression, is at high risk for suicide.
Okay. Which brings me to the question. What can we say to our viewers in terms of what to look for in our children, maybe, in our friends, that would
or in
indicate
themselves.
Or
In
in
themselves.
Yeah, look at other people. Look at yourself. Yeah.
that might indicate that maybe I am clinically depressed. What are some of the things that
Well, the World Health Organization and other health facilities certainly start talking about persistent fatigue and tiredness, just the same feelings of low self-worth. Not a 1 day or 1 hour thing, but
Persistent.
persistent over days. The feelings that you don't want to get up in the morning, you don't want to move, your loss of interest in activities that you had interest in. Indulging in behaviors, either like stopping eating or overeating. I think the stress and fatigue. I also learned there's sometimes. Stress. There's also a thing about stress and the depression. Where sometimes in the body, for some women especially, the stiffness, the thing with the body stiffness, fibromyalgia, all of that. Sort of says that things are wrong. But I think your general feeling is that basically is that you don't want to be involved in things. You don't want to
stay away from people.
You want to stay away from people or to be alone, be in a dark room by yourself.
And feelings you used to enjoy,
you
no longer have any interest in.
Feeling as though no matter how well you do, you still feel low self-worth. You don't feel good about yourself. And then if you find that you start turning to things like narcotics and so to feel good about yourself, alcohol or whatever, to start feeling good and to give yourself a lift. And doing that too long, these are things, and persistence, meaning over days, months, weeks, months, that could happen. And the fact that you could function and deliver doesn't mean that people can perform. A lot of us do perform. We hide our sadness. We were all taught we must hide our sadness and our pain. So people do their work and do whatever they have to do. sometimes, even though they have this deep desire. But it's knowing and reading and checking and then seeking help either from your doctor or whoever.
Okay.
Making a decision about meds is I know personally, I hope I never have to go on meds. I have no intention because of what I hear. The medication can do different things.
I remember visiting a friend once, young adult, and when I got there, her parents and her mother and sister said to me she's been locked up in her room for days and she doesn't want to come out. And her mother said, "Don't worry about her. She's just looking for attention or something like that." It turned out they migrated subsequently, and it turned out that she had been suffering for a long time from clinical depression. What are some of the things that you don't want to say or you shouldn't do if you suspect that somebody in your family is clinically depressed?
Well, you got to be depressed about other people more bad than you.
So depressed.
You really wasting time. You should do cough and she get out of here. You know what, man? See, look, them churning Guyana want some good licks. They want to think on the so-and-so, And that's how we relate to it.
So
and that there's no problem. You have a car. You're 16 years. You're 17. You're riding a motorbike. You got life too good.
Life too easy.
Life too easy. Boy, look, get up your so-and-so and get out of here. Find a job.
I think, and for men especially, I mean, one some of my friends was that, weakness. That's a sign of weakness.
A sign of weakness.
And these, when in trying to discuss, I said, okay, yes, if it's a sign of my weakness, well, they have it. We got to work with it. But certainly to snap out of it and all of that kind of thing.
The low energy and saying that the child is just being lazy, but the child has low energy because